Welcome to this knowledge clip on open science. The movement for open science has gained prominence a couple of years ago, and for many of today's young researchers, the idea of a pre-registration will not sound new. Open science is an umbrella term for all types of things that have to do with conducting science that is transparent, responsible, and ethical, and that make it possible for other researchers to replicate that work. In addition, open science also has to do with avoiding the use of what we term questionable research practices, such as, for instance, changing your hypotheses after seeing the data, or collecting new data when your findings are non-significant. Although the pre-registration has by far become one of the most popular open science practices, open science is more than just pre-registering a scientific paper. After all, you do not just want it to be clear that you wrote your paper following the principles of transparent and responsible science. You also want your data to be collected following those principles. Because of this, it is important to implement the open science principles early on in your research. In this clip, I will tell you more about what that could look like. As I mentioned, open science is an umbrella term, encompassing many different behaviors, and it applies to all steps of the research cycle. It is part of your research design, your data collection, your data analysis, and how you eventually write up the findings into a scientific report. In setting up your study, it is important to try and foresee as much as possible what it is you want to do with your data. For instance, how many participants do you think you'll need for your analyses? And on what basis did you make that estimation? But it's also important to think about the variables that you will collect and in what manner you will collect them. Here it is important to document for each step your choice process, and that you document the source of the instruments that you'll use and any adaptations you make, if you make any. Here the study protocol that was discussed in the previous session may also be important, because it tells you step by step how your study was or will be conducted. This is also the moment to think about whether you want to share your data with others in the long run. This may seem far away now for you, but some preparations will already need to be made early on in the process. For example, it may be necessary to include an explicit statement regarding sharing the anonymized data with other researchers outside of your research project. During data collection, it is important to also document all the choices that you make. For instance, where do you deviate from the original design, and what was the reason for that deviation? But also, what turns out to go differently in practice than you had expected? To keep track of these deviations and differences, it can be useful to keep logs during the time of data collection. But also think back on week 2 and 3 of this course, in which we discussed recruitment and communication. How did you end up with your eventual sample? For instance, who did you approach for this, apart from the people who ended up being in the sample? Who dropped out along the way, and why did they drop out? And who were you unable to reach? Good response registration and participant management is vital, so that you can later easily show others the process you went through in order to recruit your sample. During data analysis, it can be once more useful to keep a clear log of the decisions you made with regards to your analyses. What was the original analytical plan, and how have you deviated, and why? Here it can be useful and efficient, if you end up having to rerun your analyses, to keep a script of your analyses and to eventually share that script online, so that others can see exactly how you came to your findings. Apart from the analyses themselves, it is also important to document what the variables in your study look like. You can do this with a codebook in which you describe each variable in your study, as we'll talk about more this week. But make sure that your codebook is not just insightful for you, but also for other researchers who may want to work with your data or who may want to verify your conclusions. After making preparations for sharing your data, now is the time to start thinking about where and how to share it. The Open Science Framework offers a nice, clean platform for gathering all the relevant study materials and information. However, there are also other possibilities, so make sure to do your research before choosing one or the other. Also think clearly about what the data that you want to share looks like. For instance, what are data that can or cannot be shared? What is the data format that you want to share your data in? And what are the conditions, if any, under which you want to share your data? For instance, do you want everyone to be able to freely use your data? Or do you want them to first contact you with their research plans before they get access to the data? The last step of the research cycle is publishing your scientific work. Although you may feel like there is no room for open science in this step, there is also room for transparent and accessible practices here. Many journals offer the option to publish open access, which means that you'll make your work freely available regardless of whether people or their university have a deal with the journal. To publish open access, you as a researcher may need to pay a fee, although in many cases this can be paid by the university or has already been paid via a deal of the university with the publisher. To learn more about these possibilities, make sure to contact your university library. In addition to publishing open access, you can also make a non-official version of your work available for free. For instance, many journals allow you to share a preprint of your work in a repository, such as, for instance, PsycArchive. Finally, and to come back to a clip from last session, you may consider doing a pre-registration. A pre-registration, in short, is the plan that you make for how you will conduct your scientific study, which you register somewhere before starting the study. The pre-registration can be limited to just your research question and your hypotheses, but can also be broader and contain your research design and your analytical plan. For more information and practical tips on the pre-registration, please see the separate clip on this. The reason I saved the pre-registration until last is that there is no fixed moment to do your pre-registration. You could choose to pre-register only the plans for the paper that you will be writing on your data. In this case, the pre-registration will likely be done after designing your study, and perhaps even after collecting your data. However, you could also choose to register your entire project. Then you would likely choose to create a pre-registration parallel with your research design. Alternatively, you could even choose to use your registration as your research design. In short, when you do your pre-registration is up to you and dependent on many factors. The most important thing is to keep in mind that the pre-registration is not only there to prove to the world that you conducted solid science, but it also helps you to think more deeply about the choices in your research. Therefore, try to use it as a tool at that moment in the cycle in which it is most helpful to you.